I really appreciate you joining the show.
Thank you for what you've done and what you're going to do with the show, and just, keeping your viewers and your listeners aware of current events and focusing on, lives that probably would never have an opportunity to tell their story.
You quote, had one of the toughest childhoods one could imagine. Tell everybody where you grew up.
I grew up in Los Angeles, California, South Central LA. Started out on 69 in Kansas, ended up on Colden in Vermont. And that's my area. That's where I claim.
Okay. What years, teenage wise, what years are we talking?
So I was born in 65. Okay. So,
gives me a good idea. So we're talking 80s, late 70s, early 80s.
Early 70s, late 80s. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So you saw a different side of Los Angeles that a lot of us never saw. I'm 45, so I was right there with you. But a lot of people didn't see the Los Angeles, before the gangs, before the crack cocaine. Tell me what you remember about, the 70s and early 80s before LA just, took a turn for the worse.
Well, I'll have to start with my story, which was my mom dying and then me being adopted and living with my foster mom who lived in LA. And I can remember as far back as maybe age 6 or 7. But again, my story is my truth. And when I go back to those days, in comparison to where I am now, I have to start with saying I was adopted because my mom died when I was a baby. And we moved to Florence in Kansas. And the neighborhoods were pretty calm. The drug epidemic hadn't reached this height yet. There were good, wholesome, decent African-American people working hard every day and trying to make a living. And that's what it was, I felt safe as a young child, say like age 6 to maybe 13. I felt safe in LA. And then when we moved into the 80s, the gang thing started to take place. The drug thing started to take place, which just started with marijuana. Then it was pills, and then it was cough syrup, and then came the Sherm, which is the embalming fluid that they use for dead bodies. Then the cocaine epidemic hit LA, and it just turned it upside down. It took away all of the value systems that we had as African Americans in South Central LA, and it just destroyed families. I was on the end of some of that destruction. I had one sister go to prison because she got addicted to crack cocaine, and to support her habit, she committed a few robberies that led her to prison. Other drugs that I mentioned, like Sherm, I had one brother who did a robbery on Sherm, and he was shot in the head and killed. I had another brother fall 3 stories to his death, and they found Sherm in his system. And I had another brother who was killed after he did a 5-year prison stint. But he was killed in Seattle. He was shot over some drug transactions that took place while he was in jail that maybe he was directly or indirectly related to.
Oh my God.
And then my first brother was killed in 1975. And still today, we don't know who killed him. He was found in the back of Hoover Liquor, which is now a car sales spot. He was found in the back of the liquor store, face down, hanging out a window with his pants down, deceased. He had over 150 ice pick stabs in his back, but we never found out what happened with that situation. We don't know if he was trying to break in that liquor store with some people and he got stuck or electrocuted, and they felt like they had to kill him because he would have told on them if the police had come.
Mm.
Interestingly enough, my mother woke me that night about 1 o'clock. This is my brother who would always go about 11 o'clock at night and get him a Hostess cupcake and milk. And he didn't return. So my mother woke me that night and she said, hey, your brother didn't return home. We need to go look for him. And I was tired. I had to go to school the next day. I was like, okay, where we go? And she asked me, what stores did he go to? And there were 4 stores that we frequented. There was Hoover Liquor, the one we found him at. There was the liquor store on 76th in Vermont. There was a liquor store on 74th in Vermont. And then there was a liquor store on Florence and Normandy, where the Reginald Denny riot, the watch riots took place when Reginald Denny was beat.
Riots, yep.
Yes, LA riots. But just going back to that night, this is probably going to be chilling, but I was so tired that I only took my mom to 3 stores because the one that he was found deceased at the next morning was far away and I was sleepy and I was tired. So we went to the one on Florence, we went to the one on Vermont, and we went to the other one on Vermont, and we didn't find him there. And I was so tired, I didn't want to go to the one the furthest away, and that's the one where they found my brother deceased that next morning. I was probably 11 years old. He was 15 years old. I could remember us going down to the liquor store. Someone had called my mother and told her that they had found somebody dead behind the liquor store. So we packed up and we went down there, and we got out of the car, and there was all kind of people standing around. Unlike today, where there would be all kind of people in cell phones.
Yeah.
And we made our way through the crowd, and you could hear people saying, "Oh my God, what happened? Who is that? Whose child is that?" And as we made it through the crowd, I was able to peek through and see my brother's limp, dead body with his pants down, slouched over in the window in the back of this liquor store. My foster mother went crazy. She started screaming, yelling, hollering, saying, "That's my baby." And then someone grabbed me and took me back to the car, but I had already seen what I saw.
Wow.
And we basically talked to the police after that, made the identification right there. And then during the investigation, they actually found some of his blood in the phone booth that was right there. But they never knew how his blood got there. So it basically ended up being a closed investigation with no arrest made whatsoever. So I bring that up because you talk about today and what's going on with George Floyd and, you know, all these situations that has happened with the killing of black men, you know, throughout Southern California. That situation comes to mind because times were different then. Like we're not as sophisticated. We weren't sophisticated then as we are now in terms of, you know, seeking answers to why my brother was found behind this liquor store dead and who did it. Who's to say that the police didn't do it?
Wow.
Who's to say that the cops didn't find him breaking in there and they chose to kill him? Who's to say that he was one of the people that was caught up in what we now see as police brutality? I mean, it was 1975, and, you know, we just weren't as sophisticated in dealing with those type of cases. So that sticks out in my mind.
You spent most of your childhood in foster care.
I spent most of my childhood in foster care. I was adopted by a lady who knew my mother. And what I didn't know back then was this lady actually had a plan of adopting me, my brothers, and other kids for monetary gain. And
Yeah.
her plan was to adopt kids, get the money from CPS,
Wow.
take the money, buy drugs, and make more money. So if she got $1,000 from CPS, she would take that money, buy drugs, and that $1,000 would become $2,500 to $3,000.
Wow. Wow.
As a kid, we had everything in terms of clothing and food, but there was no nurturing, there was no love, there was no responsibility for us to go to school and make something of ourselves. And because she used drugs as a way of life, that is how her daughter, that is how my brothers were introduced to drugs. And when you introduce drugs into a family, just as you introduce alcoholism or anything else, it becomes the norm in that family. And it's called breaking the barriers. So barriers were broke, and those young kids in that family felt like doing drugs was okay. I could remember when they started smoking weed. I could remember when they started taking pills. I could remember when they started, smoking little pieces of Sherm, and then it turned into big pieces of Sherm, and pretty soon they were addicted to it. And because of that situation, it ruined a whole generation of family and people. And I say family and people because we were brought together as a family as foster kids, but we were basically different people living in that house, who, if it had not been like that, we probably could have, grown up to be responsible adults and created a family life that was beneficial to society.
Well, you did.
I was
Sure.
lucky. I was lucky. You know, I thank God for just, touching the heart and my mind and my soul the way He has in terms of how I view life. I've always been able to decipher what's right and what's wrong. I don't know if you remember the show on TV called The Courtships of Eddie's Father.
No, I don't. I'll look it
Okay,
up while you're talking.
the character was Bill Bixby, and it was him and his son. And he had a maid. It was an Asian lady. She was his maid, and I forget, her name was Miss Livingston. And the relationship between Bill Bixby and his son was the kind of relationship that I hoped for. I never had a father in my life, but I always said, if I become a father, I'm going to be like this guy in this TV show. And then there were other TV shows on TV that I saw and wanted my life to be like. And I held those things close to my heart. And then when I got to be a teenager, I started making friends. And then I started hanging out at other people's house who I felt like this should be my house. And I gravitated towards those people. I was open to change because I knew that the life that I was living or the situation that I was living in was not beneficial for me. And this is the thing that kids, young kids, they don't lack. They don't have that intuitiveness to understand that you're in a dangerous situation and you need to remove yourself. Now, understandably so, because they're kids. Usually when kids are in environments like that, they say, hey, this is my environment and this is where I live. This is where I love. This is how it's supposed to be treated, whether it's good or bad. And I'm here. I thank God that I was able to have a conscience that gave me, the idea that this is not how life was supposed to be, and I tried to do everything in my power to remove myself from that situation. And I did. It took a while after me wanting to kill myself as a 13-year-old, after being physically beat by my oldest sister for probably the hundredth time, and having been physically beat by my foster mother, who put a knife to my throat and told me she'd kill me because I lost some drug money.
Wow.
That she made me whole. I used to hold drug money until I got an understanding of what the drug money meant and what it was for. And then I told her to her face, I'm not holding that money anymore. There was the time when her and the drug dealer got into an argument, and they surrounded our house right over there on Colden between Vermont and Hoover with Doberman pictures and Uzi shotguns. We had to hide under the bed. And then one time a gentleman broke in our house looking for drugs, and he put a gun to my little niece's head. And I heard her screaming, and I woke up and I ran out of the room, and this gentleman ran right by me with a gun in his hand. I was his size. Had I got there a little earlier, who's to say he wouldn't have shot me? Shortly after this, I was playing with some buddies of mine in my backyard, and we ended up shooting a BB gun, and it went across the street and burst out the front window of this house. The guy who lived there came to my house, and he didn't call the police because he knew what that challenge was. And he told me, "You're going to pay for my window, and you're going to pay for it by working with me." So that Saturday, I showed up at his house at 6 o'clock in the morning, like he told me. And I went with him to a job site. He was remodeling the bathroom. He told me, "I need you to break down these two walls, and I'll be back in a couple of hours, and then stack the wood over there, and we'll see what's going on." He left. I broke down the two walls after I realized that the house wouldn't fall down completely. And I stacked the wood to the side. He came back. He said, "Good job." The lady who lived in the house came out to the backyard to talk to this gentleman, and she told him, Mr. Burnett is his name. And she said, "I know this is not your son because I've known you a long time, but he looks like you." And he looked back at the lady and he said, "This is my son." And from that day on, my life changed because I had somebody in my life who I needed more than anything.
Yeah,
the house I lived in, there was not a father or any male role models in there. The only people that came across in that house male were drug addicts. This one drunk guy named Leon who would come every Friday and spend his money on drugs or whatever else they were doing up in that house. But thank God, once I fell to my knees and said a prayer and asked God to get me out of there when I wanted to kill myself, people just started showing up in my life. It started with this gentleman, Mr. Burnett. People on the street would allow me to play in their yard. There were guys down the street who would allow me to come to their house and shoot pool. There was a guy who played football and he would play catch with me. And I didn't know it back then, but, God was making a way for me. He was, giving me ideas and things in my mind that was eventually going to be the thing that saved me, which is when I got a football scholarship to Fresno State out of East LA Junior College after only playing 4 years of sport. I didn't start till I was in the 10th grade at Manuar's High School.
That's dope.
Yes. And it took God 7 years, but he knew that would be the only time that I would go to college and have room, board, food, and an education to change the trajectory of my life.
And you were the only sibling in your family out of 9 total, some biological, some adopted, to earn a college degree, right?
I am the only one that lived in that household that earned a college degree, and the only other kid that has grown up to make something of themselves and give to society is the younger brother that I actually took to college with me when I left. He's doing well.
Let's transition into your life in law enforcement. All of that you've gone through, and thank you for sharing that, by the way. It's an amazing story, and it's even more amazing that you're still here today to tell it. And definitely thank you for that. But after going through all of that in your life, when did you realize, you know what, I think I want to get into law enforcement?
Well, during my college process, I think I went to, no, this was actually in junior college. I went to the office where they, help you decide what you want to do in life. And I put all of these things in this computer, and it came back that I wanted to do either recreation or social work. So I chose recreation because I wasn't a good student. I felt that was the easiest path for me. And then when I transferred to Fresno State, I went to social work because they had a social work program. They didn't have a recreation program. So I chose social work, and during my senior year, I did an internship with Fresno County Probation Department. And after I graduated, they ended up hiring me as a youth counselor to work on a treatment unit with boys age 13 through 16. So that's how I first got my experience in terms of working law enforcement. I worked there for 3 years, did a great job. As a matter of fact, one of the young ladies that I work with there, she is a world-renowned attorney in the field of anti-human trafficking. And probably 15 years ago, she nominated me as the person to save her life. So we actually have a documentary and a book out on that relationship. She's incidentally also my step or goddaughter.
Is that Carissa?
Yes, that's Carissa. Yes. So I transferred to the state, and like I said, she found me and nominated me as a person to save her life. And then she actually, when I retired, she hired me to work for her organization. So I am support staff for Runaway Girl, which is an anti-human trafficking organization. So when I took the job at Fresno County Juvenile Hall, people were like, "Hey, CYA, California Youth Authority, is hiring," and it was basically the same thing what we did, but it was a little bit more money because it was a state job as opposed to a county job. The type of individuals that I would be dealing with were considered worse than the ones that were in the juvenile halls. And basically, California Youth Authority was a prison system put together for violent juvenile offenders all over the state of California. Rape, robbery, assault with a deadly weapon, sexual assault, those kind of things, carjackings. They only dealt with those young men who committed violent crimes and were most often associated with gang life. So that's kind of how I got into that field. I took the test, they hired me, and I worked for that department for 29 years, and I just recently retired a couple years ago, sorry. And it was a great experience. And I'll just say this. I loved my job, and I made a difference in a lot of young women and young men's life. And I know this because now they're contacting me on Facebook and social media, and they're telling me, "Hey, you were the difference for me." Or I'm glad
that's it right there, man. That's what it's all about.
Yes, or I'm glad that, you were who you were. I used to watch you and see how you did things. I used to watch how smooth you were, how reserved you were. And I was like, I want to be like that guy right there, and that makes me feel good. It makes me feel like I set out to not get revenge in my community for my brother's death, but to avenge my brother's death by saving lives. Because the norm is when you come up in an environment like that, the code is to, if somebody takes your brother's life, then you take their brother's life.
Right.
But again, I thank God for giving me the heart and wisdom that I have to not make those decisions and to understand the bigger picture, which is I don't want to continue dehumanizing and placing violence on our communities. I want to do something totally opposite. I want to change lives and make our communities better. I didn't live in LA for a long time. I just recently moved back here 3 years ago. I actually live in Inglewood. And the first week I had to drive from Florence and Prairie towards the 110 freeway. And I drove through two areas where my brothers died. And it was almost as if it was yesterday, because finally I broke down in tears like I hadn't broke down in years, like I hadn't broke down even as a child. I broke down in tears before I could get to the freeway, because all of those emotions had come back to me. And driving down Florence towards the 110 freeway brought back a lot of memories.
Ugh.
And the sad part about it is it looks worse than it was when I was there some 25, 30 years ago.
Damn, dude.
Yeah. I'll just say that I'm more afraid now as a grown man walking in this community than I was as a kid.
I grew up in the 90s myself, and I remember, I think 93, 94, we had the most homicides in the history of Los Angeles. I think upwards of 2,000. homicides, and I feel like we're getting back in that direction. And you just said something very interesting. You said you are more afraid walking around now than you were as a kid. What about the late 80s, early 90s, when just everything was at its height? Would you say we're getting there, we're there, or we're almost there?
Well, being that I've worked with these young men who are out there committing these crimes, I'm going to say this. Back in the 80s, gang members had allegiance. They had pride. Ooh. They had rules. They had a way about doing things. These gang members today have no allegiance. They have no pride, and they don't have any way about doing things. It's all for one, and it's a very selfish society that we live in, and it's a reflection of the poverty that's taken over South LA ever since the early 80s when the crack epidemic hit. And these young men out there today have no allegiance and no loyalty to anyone. So back then, because my brothers were gang members and because my mother was one of the biggest drug dealers, I could go anywhere because it gave me clout. And because the gangs were aligned and they had rules, and they respected young men who were athletes. Not so much today. Today, there are no rules. There's no allegiance. There's no loyalty. It's a dog-eat-dog world. It's a selfish society in which young men are senselessly killing each other over clothing, jewelry, girls, emotional distress, emotional trauma. They're afraid that they're going to be next, so they're pulling the trigger first. And the magnitude that it's at now, I can't say that it's like the 80s, because back in the 80s, there was someone dying on the street corner every day, every weekend. But it's sad that we are trying to repeat those numbers 35 years later or 40 years later. What are we doing as a community? What are we doing as political leaders in this community that the same thing continues to happen? That's the question that I have.
Yeah, that's a great question. You said something.
Incidentally, I work a part-time job, and I had a chance to talk with Eric Garcetti yesterday, who's LA mayor. And he was out with his family, and I put him to the side, and I was like, I want to tell you a story. And I told him my story. I actually gave him a package of everything that I just told you. And I said, I want to sit down and come in and have a conversation with you. I said, we need housing for young women who are being forced into human trafficking, because that's the one reason why they don't get out, because they don't have nowhere to go. They don't want to be homeless, so they stay with the pimp in that situation. We need sports programs back in our schools, because that's what saved my life.
Yeah.
We need our schools back open. Now, of course, what we offer is going to change because computer technology and stuff like that has taken over. Well, okay, we could have football, baseball, basketball, and we could have computer classes for after school sports as well. But we need these things back in our schools because our kids are closing themselves in the house, on the couch. They're unhealthy. They're getting diabetes. They're stressed out. They're depressed. They're killing themselves. They're suicidal because there's no out. Studies show that physical activity allows one to release the anxiety that we've gone through over the last 3 years with COVID and all these other things that we've been experiencing. But yet we do nothing about it as a political regime. They do nothing about those things, and that makes me sad that they know that our communities are like they are, but they refuse to do anything about it.
You said something that stood out earlier that I would love to touch on. You said gangsters nowadays have no allegiance, no loyalty. It's all for one. I ask this question of most of my guests who have served prison time, 10, 20, 30 years of prison time. And I love a point of view from someone who was on the other side of the bars. In your opinion, what percentage of people are behind bars right now because someone snitched on them?
That's a great question, and I'm going to have to break it up and say what percentage of people are behind bars because someone snitched on them, and what percentage of people are behind bars because they were in association with someone who committed a crime. I'm not going to go over 50%, probably 20%. Well, let me just say this. I think that in today's society, that percentage is much, much higher. If you go back to the late 70s, early 80s, early 90s, then snitching was not the thing to do. It wasn't put it this way, snitching was not the culture. Today, snitching is the culture.
Yeah.
So I say if you went to jail probably within the last 10 years, then yes, that percentage goes up over 50% because someone snitched on you. Because yes, there is no loyalty for the gangs, to the gangs, for people, or anything. I mean, you can see it on social media, how people are, saying things about who did something to them. And these are things that when we were kids, no, you would never say what someone else did to you. But now they're doing it all over social media.
Oh man, and out in the open too. It's crazy. And not only that, they're snitching on themselves. I mean, they're putting guns in the video. They're putting, drug. I mean, it's like you are literally, and they're talking about it in rap songs nowadays. Oh yeah, I did such and such on this street, and then the cops are just piecing this together. I say cops now. Gone are the days, and tell me if I'm off, but gone are the days where officers had to go door to door and with their legal notepad with the pencil and say, hey, do you know anything about this crime? Now they just kick up their feet in the office, get a fake Instagram account, follow a bunch of dumb rappers who are posting shit, and just literally piece all the puzzle together.
You're exactly right. As a matter of fact, the institution that I worked at, there was a guy that they had, and that was his job, was to monitor Facebook. And he would go on Facebook to see if prisoners in the prison had cell phones or anything like that by monitoring Facebook and see who was posting things. And a lot of times that's how we knew who had cell phones. It would be through Facebook because they would be posting pictures of themselves in jail on Facebook.
Wow.
Yeah.
There it is.
So let me just say this. So yeah, kids are more sophisticated, but at the same time, they're not loyal to themselves or other people. And there's this entitlement thing going on. There's this boisterous thing going on. There's this thing where kids or young adults want to feel like they are popping the most, or they want to feel like, they're rich, or they have expensive clothes, expensive cars, expensive jewelry. So they are more boisterous about saying how they, got these items. And I mean, we have to go back to, rap music and what rap music means. And I did a intervention in a prison 2 years ago, slow prison. And it was a intervention on anti-human trafficking. And we got into the subject of why these young men, participated in trafficking. And I asked the question and I said, hey, let me ask you guys something. Raise your hand if you learned to disrespect a woman through rap music. It was 21 kids. Every one of them raised their hand. Every one of them raised their hand. And this is where they learn to call women the B word, the H word, or any other word that, you could think of to dehumanize and despise women. It's where they learned it from. And it's also where they're learning their masculinity through rap music that tells them robbing, stealing, and having expensive clothes is how you establish yourself as a man, which is ridiculous. It is ridiculous, and that's why we're having these rash of snatch and grabs in Beverly Hills and all over our city because these kids want to go on the devil's palate, which is social media, and show people that, yeah, I'm popping the most. When you only have one pair of Louis Vuitton shoes, but you're posting them every day, you want people to think that you are buying them every day when no, you're looting this stuff and you're showing it on social media to say that, you're the man or you're the woman or you're the boss man now. But you don't know. You're going to go down because everything's on tape now. Everything's been recorded now, and these kids are going to be found and they're going to be put in jail. And what they're going to do is they're going to stiffen the penalty with these crimes. That's what happens when they happen at the rate that they're happening
Tell
now.
them, dude. We're going to see the 1994 crime bill all over again,
all over again. And they're going to stiffen the penalty on snatch and grab crimes or crimes, of this nature. And it's going to be ugly. It's going to be just like the 80s when they came out with use a gun, go to jail, automatic 25 years. And then they came out with the gang enhancement law, which if you did a robbery and it gave you 10 years and it was for the benefit of a street gang, they tacked another 15 years on there. So now you're looking at 25 years in prison. And that's what it's going to do. It's going to take a while to get that change in legislation, but that's eventually what's going to happen. And they're probably going to make it specific to certain areas. If you commit a crime in Beverly Hills, bro, you got 10 years straight off the bat.
Mm-hmm. They don't play that shit, man.
No, they don't play at all. Let me just say this. I used to tell my young guys that I work with, look, you have two reasons why you're here. Number one, you committed a crime. I don't blame you for that because I understand where you came from. I came from the same environments that you came from. But you got 2, 3 years here, 5 years, 10 years. How many ever years you're here? This is what I need you to do. I need you to get your high school diploma, your GED, or pass your high school proficiency test. Because this is what's going to happen. You're going to mature. You're going to mature and you're going to say, you know what, I'm tired of this. I want a new life. And if you haven't completed those three things, one of those three things, you're going to do about face. And you're going to go back to all those things you were doing that got you there. So please, young man, young woman, get your high school diploma, GED, or pass the high school proficiency test before you leave here. You have nothing to do. We will help you get it done. But get that done before you leave because I know that one day you're going to mature. It may be 15, it may be 16, it may be 17, it may be 18, it may be 19, it may be all the way up until 24, which is the length of time that CYA, now DJJ, can hold an individual up until age 24 if they are a mental health case. If they're not a mental health case, they could only hold them up to age 21. But I would tell them all the time, please get your education done because you're going to need it one day. You're not going to be in this frame of mind one day. And if you don't have it done, you're setting yourself up for failure.
Yeah. Let me ask you this, because I'm all about change, and we know there's a problem in the system, the prison system, the judicial system. It's not perfect by any means. Let's say that. I'm not going to say there's a problem. I'm going to say it's not perfect. But if you had a magic wand and could change anything about the prison system, the jail system, judicial, what would you do?
First off, we need to stop. Basically, the court system is a bunch of plea deals, guilty or not. There are a lot of young men that are in prison for something that they didn't do. There are a lot of men in prison for something they did do, but not to the extent in which the courts proved them that they done. So first we have to start there with these plea deals and understand that when you place a young man, black, brown, in one of those situations, the results are not going to be good, And I'm not saying those who have been proven guilty, for crimes in which they need to pay. But there's a gray area in there. You know, you talked earlier about guys saying that, you know, they're in prison because somebody snitched on them. Well, hell, you did it.
Yes.
You know?
Exactly.
You did it.
At the end of the day, you did
So
it.
you need to pay. At the end of the day, you need to pay. So I don't buy that. But there's some people that are accessory to situations, and I think you have to look at the whole person. I have a young man, he's doing well now, but he got locked up for 5 years, all because he was sitting in the back of a car with someone who committed a robbery and had a gun. He did not know this person committed a robbery. He did not know this person had a gun. But because he was in the back of the car, he did 5 years of his life in CYA. And that was wrong, because they didn't believe this young man that he didn't know any of these things, you know. So I'm, as a matter of fact, I support Gascon. I support him 100% because I understand that when you send these young men to prison for long periods of time, they get lost. When you send a 15-year-old man to prison, when he gets out at age 30, he's still 15 years old in a lot of ways.
Wow, that's deep.
And that's a shame. I'm not saying don't hold those accountable who should be held accountable. But what I'm saying is we need to take a closer look at case-by-case situations and really decide, does this person need this kind of punishment? Maybe probation would help with this young man who's in the back seat, who really doesn't know that this guy has a gun and who really doesn't know that this guy did a crime. Maybe he only needs probation. Maybe he needs an alternative program to go through because now he's got a wake-up call and he's scared as hell. If he didn't do the crime, why is he doing so much time? If he didn't do the crime, then why is he doing so much crime?
I'm so glad I asked you that question, and it makes it more deep and impactful coming from an officer of the law, someone who's upheld the law for 29 years. I would expect that answer. I would definitely expect that from someone out there committing crime, and I just want to tell you that's a deep, impactful answer, because it makes it. This is why I respect police officers. I've always respected peace officers. Anybody in law enforcement, always respected. You know, never been one of those fuck the police guys. I used to love the NWA song. I can't lie, that was my shit.
Right.
But I've always had respect, even to this day. If I see an officer, oh, hey, thank you for your service. You know, when I get pulled over, it's what did I do, officer? And my thing is, I used to get pulled over a lot when I was between maybe 15 and 19 or 20, right? And you know what? When I look back at it as a 45-year-old man, it's because as soon as I got my financial aid check, I went out, I got the biggest rims, I got the loudest sound system you could possibly get, I got the darkest tint windows, and I dressed the part. So I was like, yes, I should have got pulled over. You know what I mean? I don't even remember the last time I got pulled over. It's probably been 15 years, because you know what? I'm rolling in a 2017 random something, nothing flashy. I'm just chilling. I'm not causing an issue. And I'm not saying that that's right when police do that. I'm just saying, I don't know why I'm saying that, but I just want to wrap it up by saying that was a great answer, dude.
Right. Well, I'll tell you this. I have to thank God, man. I didn't want the big rims. I didn't want the star stuffed jeans. I didn't want the Pendleton shirt. I didn't want the black hat. I didn't want the Pro Club shirts. I didn't want any of that. What I wanted was a better life. I wanted peace. Yes, I was pulled over on 75th between Vermont and Hoover by the crash unit, LAPD gang unit, sat down on a curb, talked to. They took my name down, tried to see if I had any tattoos or anything like that. Yes. But I was also pulled over in Ventura County for driving down the street on a Sunday afternoon, listening to jazz and enjoying my evening for being black while driving slow. And the officer told me, I asked the officer, I said, why are you pulling me over? He said, you were driving slow and that's suspicious. I said, no, I'm driving slow because I'm enjoying my music, and it's a beautiful afternoon, sir. And then he goes on to say to me, he says, so why did you put your hands out the window? I said, because this is an unfamiliar place with black people, and I wanted to make both of us safe. He took my license and he ran it, and the dispatcher said, this gentleman is a peace officer with the state of California. He came back to my car and he looked crazy and he said, sir, I'm sorry. You are free to go.
Man.
Not to mention the time when I was turning off Artesia and Western and I saw a police car with a gentleman in it. The window was down. I turned and I looked at the gentleman and I stared at him. As soon as I got past him, he hit the lights and he pulled me over 2 blocks away, and it was a white cop. And I said, sir, why are you pulling me over? He said, you looked at me suspicious.
What the fuck? Is that a crime?
I said, that's because you're the shortstop on the police Olympics team, and we played against you guys last year, and I thought I knew you. Everything about him dropped.
Changed. I'm an asshole now.
He goes, oh,
he should feel like sorry. An asshole, yeah.
Not to mention when the cop pulled me over in Gardena, and he says, I'm pulling you over because you have dark tinted windows. I said, sir, I have dark tinted windows because I do the same job that you do, and I have my family in my car, and I want to be safe.
So you said it earlier. You mentioned George Floyd, Philando Castile. There's an obvious problem out there. I think it's a big problem personally that if I wanted to be a barber, let's say, that I have to go to school longer than if I wanted to be a police officer. What do you think? Do you think police need more training? What type of training? How long? How could we fix this obvious problem that exists?
Well, our Department of Juvenile Justice, CYA, years ago, and I don't know why this didn't translate over into community policing. We had training called sensitivity training. And basically it dealt with how we dealt with our population, what our mindset was when we came in contact with our population. And it taught us to look at the person and not the crime sheet. It taught us that there still needs to be a humanistic side to dealing with people who commit crimes, our clientele. And I think the answer is yes. Police need more training, not more of the same, but they need more training in community policing, such as sensitivity training, or the same training that a therapist would get when it comes to dealing with different cultures.
Mental health,
when it comes to dealing with different cultures. Okay. And they need training on mental health services, or they need to provide a mental health person that shows up on certain calls, not only domestic calls, but certain calls. There needs to be a trained supervisor on that scene that has been trained to deal with mental health situations.
Can I ask you this real quick?
Yes.
Because my wife is in the mental health field. She has been for a long time. What she does is next to God's work. I couldn't even imagine. I'd come home crying every day, basically. I'm not built for what you do. But she tells me that there just aren't, she in a utopia, in a perfect world, she said, yes, a mental health person should show up, because most of the calls, because she used to be one for years, she paid her dues where she would have to show up with the police officer and, assess the person and this and that. And she's telling me that would be great, but in a perfect world, she said, there are just not enough mental health people right now to do that. And especially, she said, there's a big crowd of, she didn't say this, but this kind of led into a defund the police topic, where she's like, well, everyone wants to take money from the police, but if they do that, then they're definitely not going to be money for mental health, people to show up. What are your thoughts? Maybe you can parlay into what are your personal thoughts on the whole defund the police movement, and does my wife have a point?
I think it's ludicrous to say that you want to defund the police. Now, I don't think it's ludicrous to say, why are we giving them more funds? I agree with your wife 100%. There is not enough mental health professionals who accommodate the calls that go out every day that police handle. But at the same time, I see a different budget. I see a budget for LAPD or Sheriff's Department, but then again, I see a budget for mental health services, which has nothing to do with the budget for LAPD and the Sheriff's Department. I think that we need to collaborate more in our efforts to serve our community in a better way. I don't generally think that LAPD agrees with working with mental health people because they're just trained different. The mindset is different. As a matter of fact, I remember when I was in college and my teacher used to tell us, if you're a social worker, no one wants to see you coming.
Yeah.
And that's the mindset and the attitude of police. They don't want to see a social worker coming. They don't want to see a psychologist coming unless they have a understanding that this person is here to bring about safety for both me, them, and the person or suspect that's being sought after, because in the long run, it protects everybody. It protects everybody. It doesn't allow lawsuits. It doesn't allow me to lose my job. It doesn't allow anybody to get hurt, which is the most important thing. They have to see it that way, but they don't. Law enforcement see it as a situation that we need to control right now, and we need to do it with whatever force is necessary to the resistance that we're getting. But they got to change. They got to change. Do I agree with defunding the police? No, I don't. However, I do think that there's a political agenda with the police department, particularly the sheriff's department, that's making it seem like how things are now is because of the defunding. Because what they want to do is allow these things to occur on our streets so they can go back to the table and say, hey, 800 people were killed between October and January 1st, and another 500 were killed between January and 1st. We need more policing. They want to be able to go back to the table and say, not only do we need the money that you took from us, but we actually need a little bit more. That's their angle. That's their angle. They don't care about mental health. They care about themselves at the end of the day. Certain officers will have the understanding, which will come from training these officers to understand that yes, policing and mental health can work together. We do it all the time in the institutions. Why can't they do it? We do it all the time in the institution.
Wow.
As a matter of fact, a psychologist has more say-so on how to deal with a young man who's in a crisis than we do. We can show up and restrain this person, but the psychologist has to make the final call in terms of what we do with this person. Unless, of course, it's imminent danger or danger to self or something like that. But even with suicide cases, the psychologists, they make decisions on those cases. We don't. So why is it different in that environment and not different in the environment where if you was to do it the right way the first time, the prison situation wouldn't probably happen? You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And you know what, man? We were well trained working inside these prisons. I have a job right now where I work security, and they only hire ex-law enforcement because we understand diffusing techniques. And I will say this, I came out of the institution and some of my other partners came out of the institution. And we're far better at de-escalating situations than my partners that worked LAPD. The guys that work LAPD, it's all kick-ass mentality, take control of the situation, whereas our mentality is time is on our side. If we can have a conversation for an hour and it ends with nobody getting hurt, nobody putting their hands on anybody, then let's have that conversation.
Mm. That's deep. Ron Jenkins, your story is nothing short of inspirational. I thank you so much for sharing it and sharing your wisdom as a peace officer. And I truly want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for your service. Like I said earlier, I have respect for officers of the law, peace officers, firefighters, motherfucking ambulances. I mean, you guys
Right.
make a difference, man. And I don't think you get paid enough for the impact you make on our society. So before we go, I definitely want to thank you for that. And if I could ask you for a couple of minutes just to give some advice, if the last thing I want you to comment on, if you could give advice to kids out there who are doing things that are going to lead them to, prison, jail, what would you tell them as a person who saw it from the other side?
I'm glad you asked that question. First of all, to my black and brown brothers out there, if you know that a system is against you, why become a part of that system?
That's the deepest line of the night right there.
If you know a system is against you, then why become a part of that system? Furthermore, if you as a young adult have dreams, allow yourself to trust other people, because in this life, you need assistance. There are people out there with answers for you, but you have to trust those people. You have to go to people that you can trust, teachers, clergymen, family members, school counselors, therapists. Reach out to these people and tell them what you need and what you want, and they will help you. People will help people who want to help themselves.
Yes.
It's a 50-50 relationship that begins, that ends with 100% success ratio. 50% of the helper and 50% of you embracing the helper. And I just want to say this. You have more power in voice than you think you do. But you have to use your voice. You know more than anybody. You know more than anybody what you need, how you feel, what's happened to you, who put their hands on you in the wrong way. You need to tell somebody, because you're not supposed to be treated that way. If you live in an environment that's not conducive to how you feel you should be living, then you have a right to say something. You have a right to say something. And last but not least, love yourself more than anybody else, and other people will love you too. That's it, brother.
Man, I got goosebumps, man. Ron, is there anything you want to promote that we can help you promote? The floor is yours,
Yes. The organization that I'm associated with for anti-human trafficking, it's called Runaway Girl. You can reach them at runawaygirl.com. If you have any questions for me, you can reach me at rongolf6807@gmail.com. I would love to have any conversation with you about this episode. I'm a mentor by heart. If you have any situations that you want to run by me, please contact me. And last but not least, my saving grace were other people who took an investment in me. Be an investment to somebody else. There are kids in our communities who need our help. It doesn't take a lot of money. All it takes is time. All it takes is you taking a kid out of a situation that you know is not good for him and placing in him or her in one that is good for him. We all learn by condition, and some of our kids need to be reconditioned. And when we start doing that, that's when we'll see the changes made, not only in our kids, but in our communities. And I just want to thank you for having this platform. And anytime you want to talk about a subject or something, man, just let me know, and we can do it.